would exist between like the pharmaceutical industry, the government, big food, big ag, et cetera, that creates this kind of flywheel of chronic disease and then conventional medicine that treats the symptoms of chronic disease with pharmaceuticals, et cetera. That's not going to stop itself. There's no incentive for it to stop itself.
Welcome to Back to the Future podcast. My name is Victor Sadia, and I talk with brilliant minds and hearts of people who want to uproot and transform the current health and wellness paradigm. Jeff Krasno co-founded Wanderlust, a global wellness and yoga festival that became one of the world's most recognized brands in its category. In 2008, he co-founded Commune Media, an online learning platform for personal and societal well-being. In 2016, he was selected by Oprah Winfrey to be part of the Super Soul 100 as one of the nation's leading entrepreneurs. In this episode, the conversation revolves around the concept of interdependence and its implications across various spheres, ranging from personal well-being to societal structures. Jeff discusses the necessity of acknowledging our interconnectedness with the world and architecting systems accordingly. He critiques the relentless pursuit of growth in capitalism, advocating for a more sustainable and relational approach to business and community. Throughout the episode, Jeff emphasizes the importance of vulnerability, silence, and embracing the impermanence of life as pathways to deeper connection and understanding. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Today we have Jeff Krasno. Jeff, thank you so much for being here.
Victor, my pleasure. Great to see you.
So just a few seconds before I hit record, we were talking about your Commusings newsletter, in a sense that you pen every week and you send to 1 million subscribers all over the world. 1 million people read your things. So what does that mean for you? And what reflections do you have about art being shared that way?
Before the big red light in the sky went on, we were talking about how, that creative process that is very, very personal to anyone in any creative endeavor, really. But the moment that you press, return or send, it ceases to be your own creative work, and it really then becomes, a shared artifact, and everyone is experiencing it through their own lens, as a product of all of the things that they've experienced in their own life, and you can get feedback that you don't expect. And I have built my psychological immune system now to accept feedback of all sorts. And it's nice to get some degree of ego adulation if someone's really found something that you've created helpful and they express it. But I actually even now look forward to the criticism, where potentially a turn of phrase didn't sit properly, or just by dint of your own standpoint epistemology, you have an experience with something that someone else doesn't. And I've started to really embrace those as opportunities to grow and to learn. And we don't have to go into it now, but I went through a process in 2020, which was obviously a year that was rife with emotion, where I actually hosted 25 Zoom calls with people that didn't agree with me. And it was a learning experience. And when I say you building your psychological immune system, it's very similar to how one builds their physiological immune system, right? So you do that through exposure to pathogens or bacteria or viruses, et cetera. Of course, the dose is the poison, et cetera. But in the same way, I think I went through a moment of building my psychological immune system and inuring myself to insult, by really being able to listen to a lot of other people and their response to the things that I was writing at that time.
Yeah. Yeah, in a sense, I guess that COVID really exaggerated the fact that, we tend to be in echo chambers. We talk and we write uh, almost always on the same ideas, and getting these things out there with putting yourself out there, because I see that as a great thing that you do, that you're not afraid of being vulnerable, you're not afraid of showing your own doubts and your own insecurities, while at the same time having the courage to show them to a lot of people. And that really, in a sense, gives you a bit of legitimacy to write. Obviously, we get criticism and we get other ideas, but that's part of also the wellness, I guess, idea of getting outside of ourselves, because wellness is also involved in the same cloud of ideas and images and the commodification of everything. And I guess that just opening the conversation is part of the big wellness what that we want to engender, in a sense.
Absolutely. Well, an individual cannot be well. An individual divided, from the rest of the world is a cancer cell. It's essentially a disconnection. We require interdependence on every level. And we just talked about, for example, how we build our floating brain, our immune system. That it's through exposure to bacteria and viruses and pathogens, et cetera, many of which are incredibly beneficial to health. We have 1,000, on a good day, 1,000 species of bacteria that are health conferring, nestled down in the anaerobic den of our gut. Um, and this applies to the marketplace of ideas as well. So we can't live in these echo chambers the way that we are. Of course, social media and whatnot has gamed certain algorithms in order to perpetuate those forms of echo. Um, but really, we what we want to do. I mean, if we believe in evolution and we believe that out of diversity, nature selects for the best genes, well, the same can be true for ideas. That given a diversity of ideas and an even playing field to amplify those ideas, that nature can select for the best of them and they can cream to the top. And, this is how we evolve our social systems, not just our physical systems.
Yeah, and one of the tricky parts there is given an even playing game and platform.
That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah, well, I'm glad you put your thumb on that because, of course, uh, our marketplace of ideas right now, the sandbox, is not an even playing field. And what I'm obviously speaking specifically, to social media, which is gamed for hyperbole and sensationalism to essentially trigger and activate human negativity bias, such that, we follow the things that we are most triggered by. And of course, for all of the nefarious ad revenue driven, media models that favor watch time and sanctify, that over everything else, that level playing field is hard to reify because, of course, those of us who are trying to make some sense of the world, tend to see things with tremendous nuance and in a multilinear kind of way, which doesn't necessarily always leverage, human negativity bias. I mean, I'm like, a part-time Buddhist. I'm trying to find the middle way all the time. I'm trying to sit in the third chair, of essentially recognizing and acknowledging someone else's opinion in equal proportion to my own. But these ideas do not have a lot of credence, on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it. So this is the trickiest piece now is, how do we forge new marketplaces of ideas, such that we can have the stressful, hard, conversations that stand between us and the world that, we think is possible.
Yes, and at the same time, trying to leave behind this simplistic, reductionistic way of understanding truth or health or wellness or wealth
Mm,
or even sustainability, and give it a more complex, uncertain, multifactorial way of, I wouldn't say understanding, but because even our understanding is linear, even our understanding and our language are built that
yeah.
way, and that's something that I think I share with you because at the same time that you're putting yourself out there with your own stories, your own experiences, and you talk with a lot of people who are in different wellness and health spaces, and you build communities where ambiguity and uncertainty needs to be not contained but sustained, and without trying to rush for an answer, rush for a plan, rush for a thing. And I see that in you, that you're not running away from ambiguity and uncertainty and these things, but while building a business, building a brand, building a community, those things are also resistant to sustaining conflicting ideas at the same time. So, how
Mm.
have you evolved in your business and your community that, let's say, that I wouldn't say a vessel, but at least something that contains and allows for contradiction and different ideas at the same time?
That's an interesting question. Um, oh, One that I'll have to answer kind of on the spot, because I'm not sure I've completely analyzed it. But I will say that I have accrued a little wisdom in terms of entrepreneurship and designing um, sustainable business structures. And this one that I've built most recently with Commune is really built atop of many Taoist principles, if you will. So, um, you know, the Taoist vision of the world sees nature as sort of spontaneous and emergent and without a boss, if you will. I mean, that's how Alan Watts put it, anyways. That we live in a kind of interdependent way, and everything is reliant on everything else. So dependent origination, I suppose, is a theory, or pratitya samutpada, or I think in Buddhism or whatever. Um, and um, and so it is a true democracy. If you look at the arrangement of nature, it is a true democracy. At the very like basic level, like, we need oxygen. The byproduct of cellular respiration is carbon dioxide. Autotrophs, plants need carbon dioxide, and beautiful, we have this wonderful carbon cycle. That's like the simplest version of it, right? So, but this is everywhere all the time, happening all at once, right? This is, 37 billion chemical reactions in our body per second. So everything's reliant on everything else. And if you, um, begin to really connect with that understanding of the universe and of nature, then you start to architect, your systems around it. So in our at Commune, I mean, Commune obviously has like a public facing meaning and whatnot, but we've built it internally around certain principles. Um, I would call true democratic principles. Yes, I suppose somewhere on some piece of paper, I am a CEO, but I make very, very, very few decisions. I mean, most of the time, people don't even know I'm there, and I am completely dispensable at this juncture. I'm here with you. This is wonderful. This is how I would prefer to spend my life anyways. And the organism that is commune marches on. Um, and of course, this is antithetical, or I guess anathema to the way most hierarchical structures are built, where the CEO makes himself indispensable, right? No one can replace me. I need to make all the decisions, and this thing can't march on. But not only am I dispensable within the business, but everybody else is as well. And that actually results in a tremendous amount of growth inside the company, because I'm never like, oh, well, Megan, she's the only one that can press that button. No. She wants to grow in responsibility and take on new challenges and such. So part of what we do internally is we systematize every job such that anyone can onboard anyone else within 2 weeks to take over their job. So it's a system of successorship and dispensability, which in some ways is not instinctual. Um, so yeah, so these are the kinds of things I used to always also be absolutely. I started this concern called Wanderlust. Oh God, 2008, 2009. And, Wanderlust, it was a wonderful experience for me and my family. And I'm proud of many of the things that we accomplished there. It was a large scale events platform for wellness, et cetera. But I was absolutely preoccupied with growth at all costs. We sanctify growth and we never think about restoration or repair or some of these other processes that are inherent to nature that, uh, winter promises a spring every year, right? And that there's times to be quiet and to restore and to repair and to sleep. And then there's times to grow and be fluorescent. But that was never the MO at Wanderlust. It was like espresso fueled growth all the time. And then it burned itself out, more or less. And so if you're trying to create sort of sustainable organism and you look at your own body, you know that you need periods of repair. You need sleep. You need to stop eating all the time, right? You need to turn off the blue light at some juncture. You need to move your body and you need to rest your body. So I've tried to build a sustainable company around those same principles, where I'm not, obsessed with top line growth all the time. I'm actually much more preoccupied with bottom line. Just, m- run a company that sustains itself, that doesn't have to take sort of high velocity, fancy private equity dollars where you're going to have some cigar smoking plutocrat in a fucking glass panopticon looking over you all the time. So just, honestly, we run this business, even though it has significant impact, we run it like a local farmer's market almost.
That's beautiful. And that gives a lot of hope, because one of the cognitive dissonance that we get is that we see all these beautiful ventures that want to save the planet, save the animals, save climate, save society. But internally, they are built upon the same principles that created those problems. And it's
100%.
it's it's kind of it's kind of yeah, it's a dissonance because it's not only a paradox, but something that how can you try to repair something that you are destroying at the same time?
Yeah.
And we
Well,
get that,
yeah.
like it's more like not intellectually, we get it like spiritually or emotionally or like and it really like I don't know. Hearing you talk about your running a company at like a farmer's market is really uplifting and it resonates because you're not only talking about it. I can perceive it.
Hmm. Yeah, well, I've learned the hard way. I'll say that. Um, but there's a wonderful, I think it's John Maynard Keynes quote, which is, "It's easier to ship recipes than cakes and biscuits." And and so that's what we're doing. We're shipping recipes. We're not shipping cakes and biscuits. Then it's up to you, you know, to make that stew in your own house. And even our most beloved companies, and I know heaps of entrepreneurs, but like Ben and Jerry's, for example, or a kombucha, my local kombucha companies, they've all sold to Unilever or Pepsi or Coke or whatever because they hit a certain point where, the gatekeepers for distribution are such X, and now they've got to, sell to some company that has essentially completely undermined human health, and and that is the systems that we have wittingly or unwittingly created and participated in. So what is there? Is there another model um, for for businesses, for enterprise, I should say, really, that can work upon principles of sacred economics, really, where what you create is something highly relational. Um, like, I'm not trying to say that I'm like knitting grandma's heirloom scarf over here and going to give it to you, you know? But what I am creating at Commune, or I'm striving to create, is something with a tremendous amount of soul, and that people can feel a relation to. And this is why not why, but this is one of the reasons why I do try to be incredibly open and vulnerable about, my own journey, and my family's madcap experiences and all of the wonderful opportunities I've had to meet all these brilliant sages and mystics and all these people I get to interview. But honestly, man, I'm nervous as hell when I do that. And but I want to share that because it feels more honest and more relational to people. And so, this is what when communes, the oldest communes, right, is just the way we lived. We evolved in living communally. I think Gabor Mate said this to me. He's like, If the totality of the history of man was one day, we've lived communally for 23 hours and 54 minutes of it. And so this is how we evolved. We evolved to live with social responsibilities and obligations to one another. And through um, our actions, we build social capital and trust, with each other, such that our actions and our interrelationship is sacred because you trust me because I've done something important for you. And now you will do that for me without me even having to ask you. This is like the deep kinds of obligations and accountability that we build. And then, if you so and but of course, we've left that in the dustbin, of history. So this is what I'm trying to reinstantiate to some degree. Um, Even the etymology, I was looking because I was reading some of your background and some of the questions and stuff, and I had never looked up the etymology of the word commune until today or last night. And so it's Latin, of course. Everything's fucking Latin, right? But then the French got involved in it too. But it was commune was like com, so with or together, and then munis, which eventually formed words like municipality, etc., which is duty or obligation. So duty together, our obligation to each other, which is beautiful, really. And then obviously we've taken that into modern iterations of what a commune might be, a small community that's based around, shared values or a shared creative passion like artist communes, et cetera. There's been collective enterprise within communes, a famous one in Tennessee that made tofu, and Ina May Gaskin that had a whole midwifery business around it and stuff like that. Um, but I think on a more ideological basis, we've sanctified the individual so much now in modern society that we've become lonely, you know, and uh, and atomized. And, we've put fences around fences around fences, and then we become miserable because we're not evolved to be alone. We need social connection to meet our social needs. And, you don't have to look very far to see all of the mental disorders and depression and anxiety and ADD and ADHD and OCD and the litany, of DSM diagnoses goes on and on and on. Um, and then we wonder, well, what's that all about? Oh,
Yeah.
we're lonely.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, you know what? It's like I was once in a conference and they said, living in community is not the same as living in communality. It's not the same thing. And we talk a lot about community and community and community, but still we have to move a bit further. And the ironic thing here is that we've been living in that way for 23 hours and 45 minutes. And and we built a language that we now how that created the individual in a sense, and now we have to convince ourselves using that language of, you build social capital, or you do something for I do something for you, you do something for me, as if life didn't, um, since the beginning, since you were born, was based on those principles. Is that something that you
Yeah.
have to learn later on as an individual and as a society to give back when you are
Mm.
already sustained by trillions of things that are giving to you every single second? And I think language there and the English, I think once I talked with Zach Bush about this, and he said the English language is very individualistic. And so it's difficult for us to name things outside that understanding of clustering different individual points in the matrix.
Yeah, I think we have, certainly in America, um, we have there's a profound bifurcation or juxtaposition of individuality and communality. So even if you look at if you these kind of dusty old parchments that we have, they're filled with language that might reflect sort of a communal ethos. We, the people, in order to form a more perfect union, the common defense. These are right out of the Constitution, but it's kind of set against that is, we find these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain and inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So right there, you have this tension of like, oh yeah, well, we're all equal and we're meant to provide for the common defense and we the people and all of that. But at the same time, we're all guaranteed this right, this individual right for, property and the pursuit of happiness. Well, but at what cost? At what cost? And this is a teeter-totter, it's a seesaw. And now we've become wickedly unbalanced there. And imbalance always leads to disease in the human body, in the body politic. So now here we are, where we've gone way too far. We've put our thumb on the scales so far that all we care about is the individual. And but what we need to realize is that honestly, the social interest is the personal interest. It always is. Um, but it doesn't seem like it kind of at first glance. So now, yeah, now we have to relearn these things. Like exactly you said, like what was essentially just baked into life at one juncture of human evolution. Now we actually have to self-impose, whether that's periods of food scarcity or jumping in a 40-degree ice bath or moving our bodies, or being in community. I mean, I actually created a whole what I call social fitness regimen to address this very issue.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that we also make brands out of it. um, Tell me something. Another thing that in a sense gives me hope is also when you were describing that you learned the hard way to build the commune project after the Wanderlust project. All the health professionals and all the mystics and great people that you've interviewed, or at least most, have had this kind of crisis in their lives and contradiction that built upon such a level that they had to change. And I'm thinking about even Zach Bush or Sarah Gottfried or Lynn Twist. I'm not sure if Charles Eisenstein, but my point here is this gives me hope if at the same time at the global and planetary and species wide scale we will learn the hard way. And I guess
Mm.
COVID was a big opportunity in a sense. And in a way, we did. What's your take on it? I know it's
Yeah.
difficult to talk about systemic things because there are so many parts moving, but COVID was a great opportunity, but sometimes I just feel, we missed the biggest opportunity. I think we got back to normal, almost the same as the normal was before.
Yeah, I mean, during that whole time when we were anchoring into port lockdown there, I was exhorting people really not to, to sort of tamp down the desire to go back to normal, because I'm not sure normal was particularly functional, and that this was an inflection point that could be leveraged uh, for species growth, really. I think, the perhaps the most obvious miss there relates to just human health. So, we had this opportunity to address sort of the ground conditions of human health. Why were we seeing such high mortality and hospitalization rates in the United States versus some other parts of the world? Well, obviously, we have a population that is riddled with chronic disease, and has a panoply of comorbidities, and those were highly associated with more severe contraction of the disease. So this was an obvious opportunity to address the ground conditions of human health. Now, but we didn't really. I mean, many people were talking about it, independent voices were talking about it, but from a kind of centralized, at least governmental um, voice, it was completely tone deaf and myopic. We basically had to create a singular policy at the governmental level based around the lowest common denominator. And on some level, I get it. We were so sick as a country that the only option was a vaccine. Okay, I don't want to relitigate that whole thing right now, and I have plenty to say about that. But really, regardless of how you feel about that, this was a opportunity to just simply address, why are we so sick in the first place? And I think that we missed the mark on it from a public health agency perspective, but asterisk, I think many people at the individual level started to awaken to that idea and become much, much more curious about the nature of their own human organism. Now, the sources of information that they were getting weren't always stringent. But I mean, the fact that there is fluency now around some elements of the adaptive immune system in this guy, or some cohorts of society that now can talk about our amateur microbiologists and things. And it definitely did stoke a curiosity about human biology and medicine, and in some senses, regenerative medicine and alternative medicine. And I think that was a positive outcome, but certainly it wasn't systemic.
Yeah, I guess one of the main words there is curiosity, because after that, we could definitely take this conversation into the conspirational good versus bad framework. But that's even if you want to put counterweight, and many of the times we do need to say things out loud and say what's wrong. But definitely the deeper level is being curious about why are we so sick. And it's the same discussion with now so much research about chronic disease being reversible, chronic disease so dependent on lifestyle. The obvious question is, if lifestyle can create, I don't know, cancer and obesity and type 2 diabetes, then why couldn't lifestyle reverse it? And that's something that's from a curiosity point of view, I think a very generative field that still needs a lot of research and media and attention, so that we can introduce that concept, at least the idea that a chronic disease, it's not the same story that we've been told.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think it is slowly happening. Obviously, everything kind of within the conventional medical world takes a long time to kind of seep down into the roots, right? But I mean, I got a colonoscopy yesterday, which is maybe too much information for this particular podcast. Um, Ironically, during atmospheric river in Los Angeles, and there were plenty of jokes to be made there. Um, but I'm sitting there with the nurse practitioner and the anesthesiologist, and they're wondering like, oh, why am I wearing this continuous glucose monitor, on my triceps? And I'm talking about my, experience, kind of as my own N of one experiment, and they're asking me what I'm doing, and they're fascinated, and they're like, oh yeah, this is all about longevity, human longevity and biohacking, right? And I'm like, well, kind of. Really it's about me trying to understand the nature of nature, the nature of my own organism, et cetera. And so I mean, they were absolutely, it was wonderful. It's like, not that I'm going back to get another colonoscopy next week, but it was an interesting repartee having at that level. And, and that is just to say that this era of genetic determinism that riddled the second half of the 20th century is now being unwound. And we look at these emerging fields of epigenetics, let's say, or the microbiome or neuroplasticity, and what we're discovering is something very akin to what I kind of Einstein and Bohr and Planck discovered at the beginning of the 20th century in relation to Newtonian physics. What we're discovering about medicine in the 21st century is that this organism is not fixed. In fact, this organism is completely impermanent. It's a process that's constantly changing in relation to its environment, and that as it pertains to chronic disease, 90% of that chronic disease takes root within the body because of relation to the environment. Now, I'm not saying that genetics plays no part of it. You know this, there's some predispositions to disease, and then and sometimes it's definitive, sickle cell anemia, et cetera. There's plenty of diseases that are definitively caused by genetics, but the overwhelming majority of chronic disease is lifestyle oriented because we are not fixed. We are always interacting and in interdependent web with our environment. And this should provide people with a lot of agency, really, because you have certain control over your environment. You have certain control over your behaviors. And, as I began to kind of mine my own personal experience, what I started asking myself is like, listen, my genes are very, very similar to my great, 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 great grandfather times 600 on the Serengeti of East Africa in 10,000 BC. But he never got sick. He never got these chronic diseases, right? And no one in his tribe ever got heart disease or diabetes, et cetera. But my genes are the same. So what happened? Well, of course, culture changed, lifestyle changed. How were they living 10,000 years ago such that they never got these diseases? Well, they were enduring certain kinds of hardships over millennia with which they co-evolved. So periods of food scarcity, that now we call that fasting, the absence of temperature neutrality, exposure to high heats and, you know, cold temperatures. Now we call that deliberate hot and cold therapy, et cetera. You know, sedentariness, well, now we live in obviously 94% of us live in, or the average person lives about 94% of their time inside. Well, but that, of course, was not the case. So, there are all of these ways that we can realign ourselves with our engineering, with our biology, such that, we can have agency over our health and in many ways prevent and in some cases reverse some of these most prevalent diseases.
Yeah, yeah, and at the same time, just minding the proclivity of humans or even science to jump from one determinism to another. Like it's not
Yeah.
now the genetic, but now it's diet or now it's climate, wherever. It's not one thing; it will be many things at the same time. Ones that we can control at the individual level, but others that are conditioned by the systemic conditions of accessibility, racism, and all these things that tend to be, subjacent to all these things, and we're blaming the victim towards their own health choices when there's no choice there. And you've been talking a lot about this, and I guess that's one of the main things that we need to do, so that people, because we are blaming the victim, putting more anxiety on people that are sick, telling them it's their fault because they're not eating right and exercising, and that anxiety just perpetrates the same pattern. So what do you think, without the conspiracy mind frame, but the curiosity mind frame, to give a broader understanding of these social determinants of health?
Mm. Yeah, it requires an inventory, I believe, of the ground conditions in which we're living every day, right? So, um, you know, in the mid '80s, we started to see, this, hockey stick growth of chronic diseases, um, and what were the trends? What were the uh, what was introduced to Western life kind of during that time that started to propel so many of these chronic diseases, and getting very clear about the degree to which each one of us participates uh, in that day to day. So obviously, what we saw was you know a massive influx of ultra processed foods, refined sugars and grains, and mass consolidation of the food industry, such that I don't know, I think there's like 10 companies that operate essentially or produce all the food in the center of the grocery store, you know. Um, so understanding those ground conditions and being able to make the autonomous choices where we can, where it's possible, and to amplify and share that information such that people can make the best choices. Because I agree with you. I mean, obviously, we know that society has degraded, particularly in the United States, so much that the only options for some people are the convenience store, in terms of where one can shop. I actually did a whole um, segment on how to eat healthy at 7-Eleven, because for many people in the United States, that's the only option. So, okay, what else is going on kind of during, that time period that began to really degrade health? How were we growing our food, for example, the mass application of pesticides and herbicides and glyphosate, et cetera. So, these are some of the issues. How are we moving or not moving our bodies? So I think, these are the questions that I think people need to take inventory, uh, in their own life. And then as it applies to kind of systemic change, I think, we're at a place in human history where I believe it's going to have to come from the bottom up, because, y- you know, the constellation, for example, sort of the collusion, if you will, that would exist between like the pharmaceutical industry, the government, big food, big ag, et cetera, that creates this kind of flywheel of chronic disease and then conventional medicine that treats the symptoms of chronic disease with pharmaceuticals, et cetera. That's not going to stop itself. There's no incentive for it to stop itself. And these aren't necessarily like evil, bad people that work at these places. They're literally just making ends meet and doing their jobs, right? I mean, I don't believe anywheres that there's some sort of evil guru Oz behind a curtain, sucking the adrenochrome of, Christian babies or something, making these decisions. These are just systems that have perverse incentives and misalignments, and it is really going to need to be a revolution kind of from the bottom up, if we're going to tackle some of these systemic issues.
Yeah, and the risk, the survival risk lies on us in a sense, because we have to play the system, we live from the system, and at the same time we have to survive it so that we can be curious, creative, and build something else. And that's, I think, what's at stake in the next decades. That the system doesn't really make us collapse.
Mm,
In the literal sense of the world, of the word and the world. So yeah, one of the things that I've seen, and you were talking about diversity, is that if this is going to be built from the ground up and built from movements like yours, in terms of Wanderlust, in terms of Commune, in terms of, for example, I founded the Mexican Association of Lifestyle Medicine, where we gather health professionals from different disciplines, and instead of just being a medical endocrinologist, one specific thing, we have coaches and psychologists, and we have chefs, and we have, you know, eh, that cross-pollination and that
mm,
systemic understanding of all the stakes that are building our health and wellness understanding and systems is proving to be very difficult to build because we don't have the same languages. But at the
mm,
same time, it's proving to be very refreshing, because
yeah.
those echo chambers are getting very annoying for everyone in their own echo chamber.
Mm,
I want to get that insight from you, in the sense, because you build these festivals and these large gatherings, when you put together art, you put together yoga, you put together wellness activities, you put together learning spaces. But that's something that didn't exist before,
mhm,
and that's something I'm trying to do now. So what's what do you see happening in the 10, 15 years in the gathering of health professionals, science professionals, that are mixing together in a transformational setting, not only to create knowledge, but to create experiences of curiosity and wonder?
mm. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, certainly we have approached most of our systems, including conventional medicine in a sort of reductionist and compartmentalized kind of way. So, even my description of my experience yesterday, they're like, oh, you're going to see the anesthesiologist now. Okay, now you're going to see, the nurse practitioner is going to put the IV in. Now you're going to see, the oncologist. Now you're going to see that, that we've, divvied up the body as if, we're taking a car into the, mechanic shop. And of course, we know that these processes within the human organism all work together in one system. And so this is, of course, speaks to systems thinking and systems biology. In medicine, sometimes we call that functional medicine, et cetera, where you're looking at the whole thing and you're analyzing and picking apart how the systems of the whole all work together in an integrated fashion. Now, I'm not trying to say that, a pulmonologist is not useful. It's wonderful to have pulmonologists that like have an expertise in how the lungs function, and, they're discovering all of these things. But if they work within a vacuum, then there's no reason for it, because the lungs are worthless without the heart, so, and on and on and on. Um, so this is the kind of thinking that we need at a systems level, because what we need to do is start to design our social needs, or even our health needs, into systems instead of the other way around. And so this is one of the most gratifying components of Wanderlust, was seeing that I only can think of it in a French, that coup de foudre, which is like this lightning bolt, I guess, that would happen, when a regenerative farmer would meet an endocrinologist or something, and they would be like, oh my God, that works exactly the same way. The soil is the lungs, or whatever, or is the hormone, is the, um, and it was just beautiful to see those kinds of relationships form. And, I think, Zach obviously is speaking to it, beautifully, where he's interweaving human health, planetary health, soil health into one tapestry. And we need that kind of thought leadership, that can understand uh, what the Buddhists might call Indra's net, sort of the interconnected, interdependent nature uh, of the world and the universe and of systems and how they all play into that one thing. So I think, that idea of cross-pollination um, is is a much needed and beautiful vision. So, good on you for doing it. And in the end, I do think it will be the in it'll play the crucial part in whether or not we're going to experience the sixth extinction or not. Can we think in a macro, holistic fashion, or will we continue to sort of mine our reductionist way of life? And I'm sanguine somewhat about it. Of course, I want to see my children grow old and have a fluorescent life, but nature might create something better than us next time around. So, uh, you know, I, I'm uh, I'm obviously hopeful for the human race. I mean, certainly there is a lot to be hopeful for. I think, you know, we're at this strange inflection point um, in evolutionary history where, consciousness has bred very many wonderful experiences. Like here we are, I'm conscious of you, we're having this wonderful conversation, and I'll go and watch the sunset later and be able to appreciate that beauty or whatever. That's a wonderful part of consciousness. The awareness, the acute awareness of our own mortality is, I suppose, the other side of that double-edged saber. And I think uh, we need to get more comfortable with it because we're so petrified of the terminus of life that we continue to create, whether it was sort of the mythologies of Abrahamic religions or kind of the new mythologies of medicine, um, or now we have sort of this biohacking immortality movement. We need to get more comfortable with our own mortality. And I think if we do, that will allow us to collaborate around some of these visions that I think you're trying to instantiate.
Yeah, thank you. And you know what has worked with us is that we you put the endocrinologist and the regenerative farmer in the same space, but you also it's not only a lecture, in scientific terms and tables and charts and numbers and science, but rather let's breathe together, let's dance together, let's do trauma work together. In that communion of the soul, then you see the other person as, you easily could have been that person, in not such a different universe, and that makes you wonder if your ideas are the only ideas for the world. And then you can talk about
Mm.
science and technology and charts, but you begin from that part of, we are the same, and we are also not only afraid of death, but plagued by the same fears, insecurities, envies, um, uh, you know those primordial feelings that that really make us children. We're just
Mm.
children playing around, and reconnect with that, without being, without judging that. Believing that we are adults, it's probably a curse in a sense,
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah, we certainly lost that ability to play, and and to be cognitively absent. We get a taste of that sometimes in sports or athletics, tennis player. So, you know, I've just sort of become a canine when I'm out on the tennis court. And of course, when you're absolutely immersed in that present moment, that's where you feel most alive. Of course, you're not putting those words to it because it's just a product of experience there. And there's sort of a purposelessness to it. And, most of our life as we grow older is, defined by purpose. Well, I want my life to have a purpose. I want it to signify something, right? But really it's kind of sometimes the things that actually don't signify anything is where we often feel most alive. It's like when we're laughing, for example. We don't know why we laugh, and the second that we try to understand why we laugh, it ceases to be funny, right? So it's like, this is true for music and for dance, of connecting to this very kind of primordial presence. And that can create a lot, as you say, um, a lot of connection, right? When you dance with someone or when you sing with someone and you're connecting at a pure sort of non-cognitive vibrational level. And then you go have, dinner and break bread and, get into, you know, the role of glycolysis dysfunction in cancer or whatever you're going to talk about, and you're coming at it from a whole nother place. So I love that idea of creating environments and experiences, for people with different expertise, and then allowing that to marinate. I think that's a very good model for event creation,
Mm.
which I might I may borrow from you.
Sure, I would love to invite you to this year's Congress. I'll send you the invite. It's called. We haven't released the title yet, but it will be called Abracadabra. And
Nice.
it's about the magic of science, basically, and the magic of lifestyle that we have to rekindle, and the magic of a carrot, the magic of a good night of sleep, the magic of doing trauma work. So yeah, I'll share it with you. And the last question to
Mm,
close this beautiful conversation, which could have gone in so many different ways, but at the
yeah,
same time, they're all
right.
the ways are the same. Uh, you were telling me about this being when you write or when you talk about being uh, vulnerable, and we could be the honest vulnerability and why you're doing it and why you're showing that vulnerability, and on the other side the performative vulnerability. And I think that's so important in this ultra mediated way of living. You and I live a lot behind a camera, behind a microphone, and and all the people live behind a camera. So how do you see that distinction, and how to ask the good questions about that distinction?
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. I guess Brene Brown really brought vulnerability to the fore, right? And by conflating it or equating it in some manner with courage, right? So, we think about courage often as, the warrior on the battlefield, for example, a soldier, running into battle. Um, and why is that vulnerable? Well, of course, because he or she could be hurt. Um, and I think that is a helpful way to kind of back into vulnerability and what it really means is that, are you opening yourself up to be hurt or in some way or another? And obviously, the battlefield is the most kind of, acute example of that. But most of the time, what we're talking about is psychological or emotional vulnerability. And, are we shut down because we don't really want to sit in the hurt or the trauma or past traumatic or trauma inducing events? So we w- we let the wound, whatever wounds that we're carrying or fears that we're carrying, um, sort of scar over. We develop scar tissue around ourselves. And of course, anytime you've ever touched a scar, I have a few, they're numb. There's no nerve endings there. So we separate ourselves from the world in that way. Um, and that protects us. And so we decide, no, I'm not going to be vulnerable in that regard. Um, and then, as vulnerability became more of a, I suppose, like meme or became more in vogue on social media, in many respects for good reasons, it also became somewhat performative, where people were pulling back the curtain on their personal lives, and you weren't really sure, uh, what the motives or intentions were. And so I even, like I was telling you before, need to be careful myself and really examine, like, what are my motives or intentions for being vulnerable? Am I really open to letting myself potentially being hurt, or am I just trying to sort of leverage this experience for, some form of adulation, or, some form of societal approval, etc. And I think just, trying to sit in that and be very honest, um, about it. And, certainly both can exist, simultaneously. Um, and that's where, I generally have found that, when I'm really sitting in pure, unadulterated vulnerability, when I'm really willing to kind of bare my soul, particularly when I'm writing, for example, um, someone told me, I can't remember who it was, but um, I think the quote was, before you can move someone else, you have to move yourself. So, as corny as it might sound, when I'm writing, I will get emotional about my own process. Oftentimes, when I'm writing something incredibly honest and vulnerable, I will be crying as I read it back or as I edit it. And that is also a cue for me when I know that I'm having that visceral emotional response, that it will probably resonate with the reader, or not every reader, but oftentimes many readers. And that is a good litmus test for me around kind of honesty. Am I really sort of experiencing emotional catharsis, as I'm sharing? And I think that might be a good litmus test for a lot of people as they think about bearing their lives on the internet. I mean, this is a new phenomenon, right? Um, Being vulnerable certainly isn't a new phenomenon, but being vulnerable sort of at this order of public magnitude, right? Um, and so I think we're just kind of getting our arms around kind of what is appropriate and acceptable. Um, but I think, yeah, just trying to be honest is the key.
Yeah. Yeah, they say no surprise on the writer, then no surprise on the reader.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that the test you say is the best. Like when you get choked up, putting your fingers on the keyboard, that's you know a great test in a way. I also came to the conclusion that radical vulnerability, it's not the same as radical transparency, meaning that you don't have to say everything in order
Mm.
to be vulnerable. You don't have to say everything about what happens behind closed doors in your family, your parents, whatever, in order to be vulnerable, in order to really get to the things. And I think that allows a second step. Why are you telling this story that involves other individuals? And how can you say the same things or reflect on the same things, because we are reflecting basically, without naming them, without blaming them, without they're your mirrors at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's a great point, there. In fact, it kind of brings me back to some of the core tenets of Stoicism, where, courage is one of the four great virtues there. But back to kind of that warrior metaphor, the courageous warrior most of the time is not just running full speed into a field of landmines, right? The courageous warrior is balancing a whole variety of inputs, and so there is a moderation or a temperance component to courage that is a shade of it, right? So, you're going to take in calculated risk and moderate around courage and try to apply, wisdom and justice. Those are the four components of the four virtues of Stoicism, and they don't exist in vacuums unto themselves, just like the pancreas and the liver and the kidneys and the heart, right? They coexist and they interrelate, and I think the same could be said for courage and vulnerability. So I think you make a good point there of like, we need to temper our vulnerability with some degree, of moderation and also, protect, others that otherwise might be, the victims of oversharing.
Mm, exactly.
Yeah.
And you know what the difficult thing here is that you are, as a writer, as a person who's putting words out there with courage, you are the only one who knows or who can know what is being courageous for you at that point or not. Because from the reader perspective or your fan perspective, they will love what you're putting out there. Um, but you know exactly what is for you to be courageous in that moment. Probably to be courageous is not to share that thing or to work internally or to not to publish that paper which you spent 3 months writing, and you don't want to waste your time. And I think that's the beautiful thing about this possibility of those patterns and those frameworks evolve over time. What made you courageous 10 years ago, it's not the same what makes courageous now. And I think that's a nice fight to have with yourself when you are in front of the paper.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, what is the appropriate venue for courage? I mean, now people have become so accustomed to social media as this venue for expression, such that if you're not expressing an opinion there, somehow you lack courage, or you're not thinking about it, or you're not having the discussion. And I think about that in kind of specific regard to like, political stances, or, what's happening in the Ukraine, or what's happening in Gaza, or whatever, is such that, people are so used to uh, those sandboxes as being kind of the, the, the milieus in which opinions are expressed, that if your opinion is absent from one of those platforms, it means you're not thinking about it or not talking about it. And, I might say that those venues are just not suited for some of these um, issues that are so complicated and nuanced. And there's no profitable end to expressing an opinion sometimes there, versus like sitting down here on Zoom or at the kitchen table and having a conversation where you can listen and respond and have degrees of nuance, et cetera. So this is a really, really tricky moment there. And, we're in this kind of non-consensual psychological experiment, where somehow uh, our entire insides are supposed to be kind of represented on a tiny screen day to day. And yeah, it's just a tricky thing to navigate. And I have three daughters, so I pity them
Yeah.
more than myself.
Yeah, I also have three daughters. Um, and here is the courageous thing to do is sometimes to just keep silent, and hold that space too. And
Yeah,
that's difficult also to do.
100%. I mean, oftentimes, silence has been conflated with complicity, right? And, people leverage these Martin Luther King quotes and whatnot. I get it.
Mhm.
At the same time, it's in silence that wisdom takes hold. It's in silence that, knowledge is accrued. It's in silence that you're reading or contemplating or meditating. and developing thoughtful ideas. So I do think that we need a little more forbearance for silence because it kind of is in silence where we can build um, compassion and more equanimity. And, I would say that obviously a more passive way of life, given the state of the world, might be a better way of living. But being equanimous or having equipoise doesn't mean that you're not passionate. It means that you're just bringing your full passion and energy to the present moment without an over connection or an over attachment to result. And I think that that delineation is important, to make for people. So, yeah, you know, yeah, I enjoy
Yeah.
having these kinds of conversations because, honestly, you're sort of mining these ideas in real time. Um, and I think that's why it's important to have conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. Conversations is one of the most spiritual things that we can do. And also being silent. That's another sacred space there. So thank you for being so eloquent about silence. And
Mm.
thank you for sharing through that vulnerability and through that personal experience that you've achieved great things, but the humility behind it is the why those things happen in the first place. So I thank you and I honor your way, and I would love to build a friendship with you, my friend.
Yeah. Well, the feeling is 100% mutual. Um, we're obviously on intersecting paths. So I hope this is to be continued.
I'm sure it will, and if not, the silence will also be part of the conversation.
Yeah, well,
Thank you, my friend.
yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
I'll just say that, there are very few ways to experience the infinite within the human condition, right? Very few ways. But silence is one of them. It never starts and it never ends. And it connects you with the part of yourself that is infinite. And you know, a, a part of living a spiritual life is, I think, freedom from this fear of your own finiteness. And this is the subject of a lot of meditations in the Buddhist tradition, Maranasati, Memento Mori, in the Stoic tradition. But silence is, I think, where you can find a lot of solace and a lot of connection to yourself as part of the evolving universe. So, yeah, appreciate you.
I appreciate you too. And I just wrote down the idea for the fifth Congress that we'll do next year, which will be about death. Yeah. um, all right, my friend. So thank you so much, and I'll see you around.
Yeah, nice. Thank you, man.
Thank you.